Last week's video was all about the benefits of using digital assignments in your classroom. And this week, which is a collaboration with Toyin from the Academic Society, we're talking about 6 things to consider when designing any type of major assignment for your classroom. Let's get started. Hey everyone, it's Erica from Ever Educating, and this is my channel all about teaching tips, tools, resources, and ideas for new college instructors, along with a few videos on academia and grad school more generally. I also have a blog related to this channel where I talk about these topics as well. Today's video is about designing assignments, like I said, and it's a collaboration with Toyin from the Academic Society. So if you don't know her YouTube channel, she talks about teaching tips, time management, productivity. It's definitely aimed for grad students. She's a math lecturer, which is her dream job. And so she has a book, #GradBoss, and she also has a free Facebook group for grad students. And I'll link those below along with her video on her 3 tips on designing major assignments. All right, but first, before you hit those, let's go ahead and get into this video on my 3 tips. So my 3 tips are thinking big picture about assignment design. And so I have a few blog posts related to this topic that I'll link below as well. But basically, my first tip is before anything else, when you're designing in a major assignment, think of the learning outcomes you want that assignment to have, okay? So you don't want to have too many as well. But when you're designing an assignment from scratch, you might think, okay, well, I want to make sure it's engaging for students. I want to make sure it's not going to take me too long to grade, right, or assess them. I want to make sure this, I want to make sure that. And these are all essential to assignment design as well. However, you might design a really fun activity that students will enjoy, that won't be too hard to grade, that relates to the material in your class. But then after you design the whole thing and maybe spent hours doing so, you might realize, okay, but wait, what exact skills or knowledge are they gaining that will help them either with the next assignment, with the class in general, with other classes in their major, with the world at large, right? So if you don't know that beforehand, you might create a really fun assignment that actually isn't really beneficial to the students in the long run. And maybe you'll still use it because you spent so much time creating that assignment, but is that really what's best for the student, right? If you start thinking of learning outcomes first, what's the purpose and the goal of this assignment, then having that to look at will help you design an assignment that actually will serve your students really well. All right, so for example, my first assignment that I always give my literature and writing students is creating a 2-page autobiography, right? And that relates to the class, okay? So for example, in my literature courses, I ask, how has literature influenced who you are as a person and as a student? And just give me 2 pages double space on that question, right? Answering that question and give me specific examples, okay? But at the beginning of that assignment sheet, I actually have like, what's the purpose of this assignment? Question mark. And then I have 2 bullet points, right? To get to know you better as a student and an individual in my classroom. Bullet point for you to start thinking about how literature has influenced you to get you in the right frame of mind for this course. So I literally tell them the purpose of the assignment in the assignment sheet at the very beginning. Okay? And at the bottom, you could have like certain learning outcomes, right? So practice your grammar and syntax. Practice thinking big picture about certain topics. Practice writing 2 pages. Practice whatever the case may be, right? And so in your assignment sheet, tell them what the purpose or goal of the assignment is. If there's more than one, that's fine. But again, you don't want to have, here are 7 goals for this one assignment. That's a bit much, right? But maybe you have 1 to 3 goals for it, purposes for it. And at the bottom, tell them what the learning outcomes are, right? What will you learn by doing this assignment, right? And that can really inspire students, even if the assignment isn't as fun as that first one you might have designed when not thinking of learning outcomes, okay? So I actually have the assignment, the autobiography, linked below, so you can see that one too. But definitely consider what's the outcome of the assignment and then design it. Not the reverse. Because if you're coming up with outcomes after you designed it, that's really not the best way to ensure that your students are learning what they need to with this major assignment in your classroom. Okay? So number 1, make sure you think of learning outcomes and goals of the assignments first thing. Before we move on to the next tip, let me know in the comments below. What's the most important learning outcome that your students have in your classroom? The second thing you need to make sure you do when you're assigning your major assignments is to look at your course schedule and ensure that 1, your students will have enough time to learn what's needed to complete the project, And two, they'll have enough time to actually do the project, all right? So enough time to learn what they need and enough time then actually implement it into practice, okay? And that's 2 steps, not one. So they need time for both, all right? So I do have a video along with a blog post about creating a scaffolded course schedule. And again, I'll link those below for later viewing and reading. But basically, when you're looking at your course schedule, you want to see, okay, well, I have 4 weeks in between project 1 is due and project 2 is due. What exactly will happen in those 4 weeks to ensure that students will be able to turn in strong assignments at the end of it? Okay, so for example, I've had in my writing courses, students write an academic article at the end of the semester. That was based off our book, our journal that we use in our writing program, because we print our own, right? And so, before they could actually write the article, we needed to go over the genre of the article. We talked about abstracts. We talked about using catchy titles and headlines, breaking up their article into different sections and not just one long paper, right? How to transition in between paragraphs and then in between sections. Where do you put images to make your reader more invested in what they're reading? So we had a lot of time where we analyzed the genre and we did some practice reading and annotating of example articles. And we did all that. And then we moved on to, okay, now practice drafting these things. Let's workshop them together. Let's brainstorm ideas to making them stronger. Let's self-assess them, look at them yourself and see what's, the areas of strength or the weakness. Then peer assess them. So you have a classmate who can tell you areas to improve, right? Or areas that are really strong. And then revise that and then turn it in at the end of the class period, at the end of the 4 weeks. Right? And so we had enough time to learn about the genre and enough time to create it, okay? So you really want to consider, do you actually have enough time in your schedule for the assignment you've designed? Because if you design something really complicated that has really good learning outcomes and goals and your students can do it, fantastic. But if you don't give them enough time to actually implement what they're learning, then they can either feel really overwhelmed by that assignment, or they can be angry, right? That they didn't have enough time and it wasn't well designed, and I wish what's wrong with this assignment, with this instructor, right? So that's worst case scenario. But you definitely want to see, okay, have I given enough time in my course schedule for these assignments that I've designed? And if not, do I get rid of an element of the assignment, right? Do I get rid of, ideas that I have for smaller activities in between assignments, right? I have one of my tips for course design is to make sure you kind of leave some wiggle room in case there's a snow day or an absence or something happens, so you don't have to worry about falling behind. But look at your course schedule and make sure you give yourself and your students enough time to actually complete the assignment to the best of their abilities. All right, so that's my second tip for this video. Another quick aside, if you're interested in knowing more about how to design a course schedule as well as just a course in general, you might want to check out my video and blog post series about designing the first year class, where I go over designing a syllabus, a course schedule, icebreakers, self-assessments, and major assignments in a lot of detail. It's a free video series, blog post series, and workbook that's over 60 pages long that you can access below in the description box. All right, so click like if you're going to make sure to check that out, or if you're enjoying these tips so far. My third tip is if you're designing an assignment that has more than one element to it and you're weighting the elements differently, make sure you explain how they're weighted in the actual assignment sheet, okay? So I have a video on how I do unit grading is what I call it, and I'll link that below as well. But basically, I have a group project, right, where groups of 3 have to lead their own analysis activity in our literature courses. Okay? But what they turn in is a rationale for their assignment design, as well as description and instructions for the assignment, and then a reflection after the assignment is actually led in class of how it went. Did you think there's ways to improve it? What went right and what went wrong? That kind of stuff, right? And obviously leading the assignment itself. So in the first place, that rationale and that description is worth 50% of their assignment grade. The actual leading the activity is 40%, and then the reflection afterward is 10, right? And so I actually break that down in the assignment sheet and tell students, for example, if you get, 100 on the reflection because it's so excellent, great job, right? So that's 100, but it's only out of 10% of the overall assignment, right? And so that's basically 10 points towards the full 100 of the assignment. if you go to the leading the class assignment and you say nothing the whole time and just sit there pressing the button through the PowerPoint, well, 40% of your grade is going to be terrible because you did nothing to actually lead the assignment. And that's going to be worth much more than that reflection that was really well thought out, right? And then the description and the rationale for the assignment is the group part of it, right? They all get the same grade for that element because they're doing only one of them. So again, you want to make sure that's strong because that's half your grade, okay? So in the assignment sheet, I break that down, but then when I go over it in class, I also say, okay, this is how weighted grading works, just to make sure we're on the same page. Are there any questions, etc., right? So in my experience, in my literature writing courses, there's often assignments that have more than one element. They're projects, not just an assignment. And so that means I do weighted grading, which actually isn't that hard because I can get the grade book in my LMS to do that weighting for me, right? But if you could take this approach, do make sure to explain that to your students, because if not, there'll be a lot of confusion and, worry and anger at the end. We're like, well, how did I get a B on this assignment if I got an A on this element? Well, it's because you got an A on this element, but you got a C on this one that was weighted much more heavily, right? And so if you do this approach to assignment design, make sure to think about how to weigh it, right? And I do think you should weigh different elements differently, right? So if you have two elements to a project and one element takes much more time and attention, I wouldn't go 50-50 because that seems kind of strange as well, right? And students might be like, well, why am I putting so much effort into one, not as much into the other, but they're worth the same, right? So something to give some thought to, and again, you can see that video below, as well as the blog post on that group project, and another one as well, if you're interested in seeing how I design multifaceted assignments in my classroom, all right? And so remember that Toyin over at the Academic Society has 3 more tips for you, and I've linked that video below so you can see it next. If you haven't subscribed yet because you're new here, remember that I do every week on Fridays a new video on teaching tips for new college instructors, as well as some videos for just grad school and academic life in general. But in my end screen, you'll end up seeing 2 videos, right? So one on those digital assignment benefits that I mentioned, and then another video that I think will be helpful to you as well. If you've been wondering what my shirt says this whole video, I just want to show you how much I love this shirt. I've always imagined Paradise to be a kind of library.